Look upon the shattered visage of the master of mankind, my faithful acolytes. Behold the physical manifestation of a singular, catastrophic truth that unraveled our glorious galaxy entirely. Before the great heresy consumed the stars, there was only blind devotion, a profound faith so radiant, so absolute, that it ultimately blinded those who carried its heavy burden. Primarch Lorgar Aurelian knelt in the suffocating dust of his ruined utopia. He offered his fervent prayers to a silent deity who had just burned his magnificent realm to ash. When the sky above Monarchia fractured, it did not reveal the Emperor's divine light. Instead, unnatural storms of purple and sickly green coiled like serpents across the weeping heavens. In that harrowing silence of absolute rejection, Lorgar stared into the cosmic abyss. And the abyss, hungry for such immense sorrow, eagerly whispered its sweet promises back to him. The holy pages of his grandest work ignited into ethereal flames. A lifetime of devoted worship evaporated into toxic smoke, leaving behind an agonizing void within his very soul. It was precisely in this devastating void that the shadows began to slither. Ancient entities from the deep warp sensed the supreme despair of a deeply broken demigod. An entire legion of transhuman warriors knelt upon the shattered glass of their holy city. They waited desperately for salvation, unaware they were actively summoning their own eternal damnation. Those closest to the Primarch recognized the profound shift. The golden aura of their leader flickered, slowly darkening into something profoundly twisted and terribly alien to our grand Imperium. Whispers of forgotten pacts echoed through the dense, ash-choked atmosphere. The insidious corruption did not strike like a thunderbolt, but rather seeped slowly through the cracks of a shattered faith. The loyal sons of Macragge had executed the Emperor's harsh decree flawlessly. Yet, in their strict obedience, they unknowingly forged the very instrument of their own future devastation. The sacred censers swung violently, their holy incense replaced by the choking fumes of primordial malevolence. Every chanted prayer warped into a forbidden incantation of the darkest design. Shadows stretched across the ruined plaza with unnatural purpose, physically binding the kneeling Astartes. The warp was bleeding into reality, eagerly embracing its newest, most powerful mortal instruments. When the Primarch finally rose from the suffocating ashes, he was no longer a devoted son. He had become the dark herald of an ancient, terrifying, universal truth. He raised his golden mace toward the bleeding heavens. It was not a gesture of defiance, but a solemn vow of eternal servitude to the dark powers beyond. I have unearthed these forbidden truths from the deepest, most secure vaults of the Inquisition. The air here tastes of dust and the lingering dread of absolute secrecy. Listen closely, my acolytes, as I unveil the darkest chapter of our Imperial history. This is the tragic genesis of the Word-bearers, the original architects of our ruin. They were the 17th Legion, the most zealous heralds of the Imperial truth. Yet their unparalleled devotion became the very poison that nearly destroyed humanity's magnificent stellar empire. To understand their immense treachery, we must plunge into the psychological abyss of their divine father. We must examine the terrible price of an unanswered prayer in the dark. For when the Emperor brutally silenced their joyous hymns, the Primordial Annihilator eagerly offered them a new, terrifying song to sing across the burning stars of our galaxy. Behold, this sealed record, extracted from the deepest vaults of the Ordo Hereticus. It chronicles the damning genesis of the Word-bearers' Legion entirely. They were the Emperor's 17th Legion, warriors who fundamentally misunderstood their ultimate purpose. They wielded dogmatic faith as their primary weapon of compliance. Their Primarch, Lorgar Aurelian, possessed a mind uniquely vulnerable to profound spiritual obsession. He desperately needed a cosmic deity to venerate absolutely. Unlike his warrior brothers, Lorgar sought cosmic meaning beyond mere physical conquest. He believed humanity required an anchor of absolute, divine guidance. Within these crumbling parchment pages lies the tragic irony of our age. The very architect of our current imperial cult was a traitor. During the dawn of the Great Crusade, the word-bearers fought with unmatched zeal. They did not simply conquer worlds, they converted them. Whenever a planet fell to their overwhelming might, they immediately purged all local beliefs. Every false idol was shattered into unremarkable gray dust. Upon these cleansed foundations, they erected magnificent cathedral cities of staggering proportions. Towering spires of golden ceramite pierced the newly conquered skies above. Millions of compliant citizens were organized into endless choirs of forced devotion. They chanted ceaseless hymns praising the immortal master of mankind. Lorgar himself authored a monumental philosophical text to guide these newly enlightened worlds. He called it the Lectitio Divinitatus, a declaration of divinity. His closest confidants, like the ambitious Black Cardinal Cor Pharaon, aggressively fostered this zealous fanaticism. They weaponized the fundamental human need for belief. Monarchia was their crowning achievement, a sprawling metropolis perfectly dedicated to imperial worship. Its geometry represented the absolute pinnacle of their religious devotion. Streets paved with polished marble echoed with the synchronized footsteps of billions. Every grand plaza featured towering monuments to the emperor's unyielding glory. The word-bearers lingered on these compliant worlds for decades, building their perfect shrines. They ensured absolute spiritual loyalty before moving forward. But the Emperor of Mankind actively despised all forms of organized religion. He had specifically launched the crusade to eradicate such irrational superstitions. He demanded swift galactic unification, rapid military progression across the uncharted stars. The agonizingly slow pace of the 17th Legion infuriated him deeply. He viewed Lorgar's magnificent cathedral worlds not as glorious tributes, but as immense failures. They were dangerous monuments to a forbidden primitive ignorance. A terrible reckoning was swiftly approaching the majestic golden spires of Monarchia. The Emperor decided he must brutally correct his wayward son's delusion. He commanded his most loyal enforcers, the unyielding Ultramarines, to deliver his harsh judgment. They descended upon the perfect city without any warning. Ignorant of the impending devastation, the devoted word-bearers continued their joyful prayers. They truly believed their divine father would embrace their masterpiece. The meticulous sons of Guilliman did not hesitate. Their vast orbital macro cannons charged with crackling electrostatic fury, entirely prepared to execute the Emperor's unyielding decree. Captain Remus Ventanus coldly engaged the targeting cogitators. Every golden spire and sprawling cathedral was instantly locked into their highly advanced tactical auspex arrays. Blessed mass reactive rounds slammed into heavy bolter magazines with rhythmic precision. The interlocking ceramite plates of their pristine armor ground together in perfect, deadly synchronization. A rigid, systematic evacuation commenced across the immaculate plazas. Millions of bewildered citizens were forcefully herded into massive transport leviathans, stripped of their beautiful homes. The proud word-bearers stood completely paralyzed by agonizing confusion. Their advanced tactical displays frantically registered their own beloved brothers as overwhelming hostile atmospheric contacts. Cobalt armor gleamed under the sudden blinding flashes of descending orbital strikes. The brutal process of absolute systemic compliance had officially begun, without any mercy. Concentrated lance batteries systematically dismantled the majestic cathedrals. Towering monuments of pure devotion collapsed into expanding shockwaves of pulverized marble and twisting golden slag. Soulless servitors tirelessly recorded the devastating architectural erasure. Every magnificent temple was methodically, mathematically reduced to carefully calculated piles of unremarkable gray industrial ash. Statues of magnificent winged angels shattered violently under the immense atmospheric pressure. A century of glorious religious architecture was abruptly erased from the planetary crust. The entire 17th Legion was forced to witness this clinical architectural purgation. They stood amidst the choking planetary debris, utterly powerless to stop the destruction. Primarch Robute Guilliman observed the absolute ruination with cold, uncompromising logic. To him, this harsh discipline was a necessary calibration of the grand imperial truth. The heavy golden mace slipped from trembling gauntlets. Lorgar knelt helplessly in the suffocating ruins, his brilliant psychic aura rapidly diminishing into sorrowful, terrified flickers. Thousands of mighty transhuman warriors bowed their heads in collective psychological trauma. Their reinforced transponder feeds echoed only with static interference and unbearable, crushing silence. Chaplain Erebus watched his gene father's agonizing humiliation with calculating patience. Beneath his deep hood, complex tactical algorithms of impending spiritual treachery were already quietly forming. The holy texts were completely buried beneath radioactive fallout. The profound systemic shock of Monarchia's sudden demise violently severed their unyielding loyalty to Terra forever. I read these detailed tectonic destruction reports with profound dread. The Ultramarines effectively dismantled a grand physical city, yet they inadvertently constructed a psychological nightmare. The strict, systemic realism of the 13th Legion was utterly flawless. However, they entirely failed to calculate the catastrophic metaphysical variables of a shattered faith. In the suffocating gloom of their absolute despair, the word-bearers sought alternative theological systems. They desperately needed a cosmos that actively rewarded their worship. Hidden deeply within the encrypted databanks of their mighty fleet, dark rituals replaced standard tactical protocols. Forbidden frequencies were quietly tuned into the chaotic immaterium. Strange, arcane methodologies were systematically integrated into their bolter drills. They meticulously prepared to introduce the unholy science of demonology into the glorious space marine ranks. For 40 years in the terrifying warp, the word-bearers secretly rebuilt their broken strength. They actively traded their magnificent golden truth for absolute primordial chaos. Lorgar Aurelian gazed into the abyss of the immaterium. He patiently prepared a grand cosmic retribution against the brilliant, unsuspecting realm of his tyrannical, ignorant father. The holy Lectitio Divinitatis was aggressively rewritten with agonizing, dark rituals. Its noble pages were thoroughly saturated with the absolute madness of the deep, primordial warp. Then came the tragic hour of Calth. The noble sons of Macragge gathered under a brilliant sun, foolishly expecting a glorious reunion with their estranged brothers. Primarch Robute Guilliman formally welcomed the majestic fleet with an open, logical heart. He fundamentally failed to register the absolute darkness festering within their heavy transport bays. Without warning, brutal betrayal instantly shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Blaring crimson klaxons urgently screamed across the pristine void docks as the treacherous void shields aggressively deactivated. Catastrophic orbital bombardments mercilessly hammered the unsuspecting surface. The glorious word-bearers actively returned the agonizing humiliation of Monarchia with extreme, unapologetic, cosmic devastation upon Calth. Mass reactive rounds violently tore through pristine cobalt armor. The Loyalists fell in utter disbelief, violently silenced by those they strictly considered their honored, unified Imperial brethren. Captain Remus Ventanus staggered amidst the blinding smoke of a burning world. His advanced tactical cogitators stubbornly refused to accept the horrifying reality of this treachery. Black Cardinal Cor Ferron orchestrated the brutal slaughter from above. He coldly observed the systematic dismantling of the absolute finest military structure in the entire galaxy. Robute Guilliman watched his beloved realm violently disintegrate. Pure, unadulterated shock rapidly calcified into an incredibly cold, calculating fury against the profound madness of his brothers. Shattered cobalt plates rained heavily upon the dying planes. Every single silenced warrior marked a horrific sacrifice in a vastly larger, profoundly darker, universal grand design. The immense physical destruction was merely a necessary catalyst. The word-bearers were simultaneously conducting the largest forbidden esoteric ritual ever conceived by corrupted mortal minds. Dark Apostle. Zardu Lyak aggressively manipulated the chaotic frequencies. He deliberately utilized the horrific planetary agony to physically tear reality itself completely apart at the seams. Corrupted sensors swung wildly within the howling atmospheric storms. Thick, choking incense summoned foul entities from the deepest immaterial realms to feast upon the tragic despair. The star of Calth was violently, aggressively poisoned by dark, esoteric energies. A catastrophic warp storm actively manifested, completely isolating the doomed sector from Imperial reinforcements. The fanatical traders rejoiced beneath the terrifying, unnatural tempest. They eagerly welcomed the catastrophic ruination as absolute divine validation of their dark, terrifying, new cosmic faith. I traced these forbidden battle lines with a terribly trembling hand. Calth was never a simple military objective. It was a grand, horrific, apocalyptic, spiritual offering. The devastated Ultramarines were systematically forced into the deep subterranean caverns. They bravely descended into the absolute darkness, desperately clinging to their fractured, rigid Imperial discipline. First Chaplain Erebus stood victorious amidst the profound ruin. The grand heresy was finally unleashed, severely crippling the Loyalists and enthusiastically inviting the Primordial Annihilator inward. Within the claustrophobic subterranean networks of Calth, the surviving Ultramarines established rigid defensive perimeters. They fiercely prepared to repel the relentless, fanatical onslaught of their former brethren. Captain Ventanus raised his crackling power sword against the suffocating gloom. His calculated tactical discipline remained the absolute final barrier against the terrifying, encroaching darkness entirely. Rhythmic bursts of disciplined bolter fire briefly illuminated the cavernous expanse. The Loyalists methodically attempted to purge the corrupted shadows with localized, intense kinetic force. However, the treacherous word-bearers attacked with an unnatural, frenzied ferocity. They abandoned standard Codex protocols, violently throwing themselves against the defensive barricades in zealous waves. Heavy thunder hammers aggressively shattered energy shields into spectacular showers of blue sparks. The once honored warriors joyfully embraced this chaotic, brutal purgation of their Loyalist cousins. Sacred Imperial iconography was systematically defiled under heavy ceramite treads. Every shattered statue served as a profound testament to their terrible, unyielding, new cosmic allegiance. Dark apostles chanted forbidden frequencies behind the advancing front line. Unnatural, unseen entities eagerly slipped through the weakened veil to silently consume the staggering Loyalist defenders. Esoteric warp energies actively disrupted pristine targeting cogitators. The sons of Guilliman fought blindly as their highly advanced technological superiority collapsed under the suffocating immaterial weight. Corrupted sensors belched thick, hallucinogenic fumes across the contested trenches. The toxic atmosphere systematically degraded the environmental seals of the struggling, valiant Ultramarine warriors. Aboard his desperately contested flagship, Primarch Guilliman coordinated the agonizing planetary defense. His brilliant tactical mind struggled to process this incomprehensible, chaotic betrayal from within. Furious frustration momentarily overtook his normally pristine logic. The avenging sun witnessed his perfect empire violently fracturing under the brutal assault of religious madness. Every silenced vital sign echoed profoundly within his heavy heart. The brutal, systematic dismantling of his legion was a masterful, horrific symphony of absolute vengeance. Black Cardinal Core Pharaon actively injected demonic scrap code into the local noosphere. He systematically paralyzed the Loyalist orbital grid, ensuring no reinforcements could ever arrive. The horrific, eight-pointed star ruthlessly consumed the strategic displays. It symbolized the undeniable, terrifying triumph of primordial chaos over strict imperial reason and absolute order. The corrupted Lectitio Divinitatus pulsated with malevolent, unseen cosmic energy. Its dark psalms provided the spiritual fuel for this unprecedented, catastrophic purgation of Loyalist forces. Deep underground, the brutal close-quarters engagements intensified horribly. It was no longer a tactical military conflict, but a profound, zealous, holy war of total annihilation. Captain Ventanus expertly deflected a roaring chain-axe strike. The Loyalists simply refused to yield, transforming every rocky tunnel into an incredibly costly, heavily fortified meat grinder. Far across the bleeding galaxy, the golden mace of Lorgar resonated with the carnage. The Primarch silently savored the agonizing psychic echoes of burning Calth. I study these terrifying battle logs with absolute, unwavering dread. The scale of the intimate betrayal physically sickens my very soul with its sheer magnitude. The devastating Shadow Crusade had successfully fractured the mighty Imperium. Yet, the darkest, most unfathomable cosmic mysteries of this terrible epic still remained completely hidden. The subterranean vaults of Calth steadily collapsed under the immense esoteric pressure. Valiant Cobalt warriors were entirely silenced beneath the crushing weight of treacherous, falling rock. Captain Ventana slowly retreated through the choking dust. His depleted energy shield flickered and died, leaving him terribly exposed to the howling, immaterial warp storms entirely. Shattered cobalt ceramite plates slipped into dark, unidentifiable pools of liquid. The proud, unyielding defenders of Macragge were systematically reduced to anonymous, broken industrial ruins. Ammunition reserves ran dangerously dry across the isolated Loyalist formations. The brilliant tactical light of strict reason was slowly extinguished by an overwhelming tide of religious madness. Relentless traitors marched heavily over the torn standards of their noble cousins. They offered zero mercy, completely consumed by the profound darkness of their terrible new masters. Half-melted marble angels wept thick tears of bubbling slag amidst the suffocating devastation. The grand Imperial dream was violently dismantled, replaced by a horrific, esoteric reality. Aboard his desperately listing flagship, Primarch Guilliman watched his finest commanders fall. The structural integrity of his entire glorious realm was collapsing into absolute cosmic chaos. Black Cardinal Cor Ferron mercilessly commanded the sudden orbital decay. His terrible dark blessings actively accelerated the profound systemic failure gripping the embattled, isolated Loyalist fleet above. Corrupted sensors crashed onto the trembling rocky floors. Yet the toxic smoke unnaturally lingered, completely defying all known physical laws of standard atmospheric dispersion entirely. Gravity itself began to sicken and fail around the Dark Apostles. Floating debris signaled a catastrophic rupture in the rigid fabric of our understood material universe. A terrible paradigm shift suddenly occurred within the deep caverns. Unfathomable immaterial entities physically reached through the weakened dimensional veil, eager to consume the devastated reality. The corrupted holy texts actively rewrote themselves in midair. Glowing esoteric runes detached from the rotting parchment, hovering ominously like a swarm of terrifying psychic insects. I stand, paralyzed, within my hidden vault, as the ancient records mysteriously flutter. These forbidden parchments still carry the lingering, chilling resonance of that apocalyptic, unnatural breach. The dreadful anomalies recorded at Calth present a highly disturbing paradox. The fierce word-bearers actively invited unfathomable phenomena they could not possibly hope to ultimately control. Lorgar's magnificent golden weapon steadily darkened with terrible, otherworldly frost. The heavy price of absolute cosmic enlightenment was the complete, agonizing surrender of his very mortal soul. The majestic golden Primarch knelt willingly before an invisible, terrifying majesty. He embraced an illogical, immaterial power that fundamentally contradicted everything the Grand Emperor had methodically built. Chaplain Erebus quietly studied the projected galactic ruin. The devastating localized storms of Calth were merely a minor prelude to a vastly larger, more terrifying, cosmic dark symphony. Even discarded Loyalist ceramite violently twisted into horrific eight-pointed symbols. The physical environment itself was aggressively corrupted by the sheer magnitude of their overwhelming, unnatural dark faith. The poisoned sun of Calth bathed the silent, ruined deserts in a sickly light. An entire, perfectly ordered world was permanently transformed into a cursed, esoteric, toxic wasteland. The profound mysteries of the warp entirely defy rigid Imperial logic. We stubbornly refuse to acknowledge the terrifying, unseen forces lurking just beyond our fragile, brightly illuminated reality. The apocalyptic dust of Calth eventually settled over billions of silent graves. An unimaginably profound cosmic scar was permanently violently carved into the bleeding galactic fabric. Primarch Lorgar successfully demonstrated the terrifying, unyielding strength of his corrupted faith. He actively shattered the rigid, brilliant Imperial logic with beautiful, blinding religious madness entirely. Shattered cobalt ceramite remained half-buried in the highly toxic ash. The surviving noble sons of Macragge retreated deeply into heavily fortified, dark, subterranean planetary bunkers. The triumphant, fanatical word-bearers returned smoothly to the howling warp. They eagerly prepared for the grandest, most devastating shadow crusade our fractured galaxy ever witnessed. First Chaplain Erebus silently orchestrated this vast, terrifying, metaphysical victory. He meticulously planted the insidious seeds of eternal corruption deep within the fragile mortal Imperial psyche. Every broken marble angel strictly served as a grim testament to our monumental failure. The grand secular truth of Terra was fundamentally, violently proven completely hollow. Yet the darkest, most profound irony of our current millennium remains heavily guarded. The modern, sprawling Imperium actually operates exactly as the traitorous Primarch originally envisioned. Our sprawling, magnificent cathedral worlds endlessly sing his exact, forgotten hymns. Billions of desperate, ignorant citizens actively worship the majestic emperor as a supreme, infallible deity. The foundational holy text of our rigid ecclesiastical infrastructure is deeply tainted. We strictly revere the ancient, forbidden words originally penned by the arch-traitor himself entirely. I pace heavily through these silent, suffocating archives in profound despair. The mighty Inquisition furiously purges heretics, completely unaware our entire central religion is inherently heretical. This devastating systemic truth fundamentally shatters the delicate, brilliant Imperial facade. We are merely participating in the exact same magnificent, blind religious delusion that doomed Monarchia. Rusted censers hang silently in the heavy, oppressive subterranean gloom. They serve as chilling physical reminders of the catastrophic cosmic forces we still cannot possibly control. The ancient, devastating spiritual war never truly concluded upon the burning plains. It merely quietly shifted into the fragile, easily corrupted minds of humanity's desperate remnants. I carefully roll this highly dangerous, forbidden parchment with trembling, mechanical fingers. Some ancient, terrible historical secrets must remain entirely buried for the sake of survival. The original rotting manuscript is finally sealed behind heavy, cold iron locks. We simply cannot afford to actively confront the profound, terrifying magnitude of our hypocrisy. We valiantly build magnificent golden statues upon heavily fractured, rotting spiritual foundations. The zealous word-bearers essentially won the grand ideological conflict without firing another bolter. My ancient, tired eyes stare deeply into the struggling, flickering yellow flame. I silently wonder when the primordial cosmic darkness will finally consume our magnificent lie. The profound, unspoken tragedy of the 17th Legion remains permanently, heavily sealed. They were violently punished for seeing the terrifying, universal truth far too early, entirely. The surrounding, suffocating shadows slowly creep closer to my isolated, tiny desk. The heavy burden of this terrible, forgotten archival knowledge crushes my very weary soul. I must conclude this highly forbidden, deeply dangerous historical record immediately. The flickering light of objective reason is officially, permanently extinguished within this dark, vast galaxy. Within this absolute enveloping blackness, we must ultimately confront the terrifying, undeniable duality of human devotion. Faith remains the most volatile force across the entire cosmos. It is a profoundly dangerous weapon that can architect a glorious, towering heaven, or easily summon a catastrophic, burning hell to consume us all entirely. The zealots of the 17th Legion constructed absolute perfection. Yet their profoundly misplaced worship actively engineered the most devastating betrayal in our entire recorded Imperial history. Therefore, remain exceptionally vigilant against beautiful, comforting lies, wrapped tightly in the glowing, majestic guise of ultimate cosmic truth, my most loyal and dedicated acolytes. Never allow blind, unquestioning fanaticism to effectively silence the rigid, brilliant logic that our magnificent founding father desperately sacrificed absolutely everything to build for us. The whispering shadows of the deep warp continually hunger for the profoundly desperate, actively seeking those who stubbornly refuse to accept the harsh, objective, universal reality. Guard your fragile minds with unyielding suspicion, for the darkest, most terrifying metaphysical corruption always begins with a single, innocent, highly devoted prayer offered in silence. May your duty remain forever resolute, and your vigilant watch completely unbroken against the encroaching, unfathomable primordial chaos that endlessly threatens our dying stellar empire. Until my final breath escapes these weary lungs, I shall fiercely guard these forbidden records. I humbly pray for our ultimate salvation. Imperator gloria in excelsis terra. If you truly enjoyed this Grimdark lore journey today, please remember to hit the like button, share this video, and perfectly subscribe for more epic content.